Welcome. This is David Bowles, Human Meme. Today's topic, Harold Bloom and the American Aesthetic. The great literary critic Harold Bloom recently died, and his ability to remember and to actively recall anything he ever read gave him a great amount of intricate knowledge about art and aesthetic and intention and literature, and he inspired many genius minds across the world and during his time at Yale and beyond. Harold Bloom's reading, critical thinking, critical analysis of any bit of writing was not to pull out cultural, racial, or gender influences and then ascribe them to an unknowable intention. Instead, Harold Bloom was anti-mimetic. He wanted us to take on a piece of writing on the terms of the work itself. As it was, as we find it. Harold Bloom's most deliberately unattenuated way to address a piece of work was to dare not to ask, what is it for? Why does this thing exist? No, Harold Bloom wanted us to ask why something relates to us and how it affects us. Are we expected to embed our own values and thoughts into the definition of the work? Or are we to try to reestablish ourselves outside the realm of the traditional aesthetic triangle: art, object, and observer? And with those three, art, object, and observer, do we merely atone for the effort exerted to create this work of art, this piece of literature? Well, my human meme friend, a work of art, a piece of literature, Professor Bloom argued, stood on its own merits, in its own sacred space. And it was our human duty and our moral obligation to accept those atavistic intricacies of time, space, and reflexive influence and transmute them into meaning. And Professor Bloom also knew we all had limited time, just so many hours and moments in a day, and we had very little influence outside our own mind, because the self of the mind is an imperative. We are forced willingly and with forethought to decide what we shall read or not read. We have the determination of self-choice. We have a stasis, a locked amount of time to influence ourselves and others, and what we decide to dedicate our thoughts to is what makes up the differences between living and knowing. And now we return to this lowly question that so many ask: what is it for? What is it for means we are obligated to actively reason why something was written or created. Was it a response to current thought? Was it a repose against another poem? Was a new set of standards attempted to be set in the dark, where no light can penetrate to demonstrate there are no new ideas, only recycled, standardized ideals? What is it for? The wrong question to be asked of an artist or of an aesthetic work. Well, Professor Bloom would say aesthetic enjoyment is the only parameter of measure that matters, and we should never be asking of a work of art why it exists. Politics, gender, race, Professor Bloom warned, could be used as tools for purposeful misunderstanding, the implements of unshaping an idea. By employing current thought and prejudices and mores and values against a pre-existing work that may have been created hundreds of years ago outside the faint outline of current thinking was dangerous, because intention and prejudice can too easily be applied and accused against a freestanding modern work or a work from antiquity, with no defense being able to be offered against the criticism by the work, because the work being attacked only exists as we find it in our time, and not as others prescribe it to be influenced and determined. Now, it does take great intellectual and emotional discipline to ask against while ignoring those who demand to know, what is it for? And then begin to try to provide an answer. Because the answer to what is it for will never be sufficient enough for those asking. It will never be malleable enough to please any other mind other than the one doing the unthinking. The world must fit and revolve within beauty and around pleasure, or there is no rationale for the task of avoiding the grave. We do not read to punish ourselves. We read, we enjoy art to relinquish those we are not. I find value in this. You do not. You find value in that. I do not. And then the world should end in such disagreement? Or is there some fallow space between the lines of agreement and disagreement where comity and understanding might just come together to form a new meaning without misreading or mistreating each other or sabotaging the underlying work? Every poem ever written is a response to something that is already pre-existing, and it is usually another poem that foments that carcinogenic reaction. And that circle of repetition can be valuable for divining an applicable aesthetic. And it can also destroy the generational buildup of psychic exploitation of what was, what wasn't, and what never was, and what must always be. Yes, we are made up of our influences and not our beings. Our thoughts precede us in death and then live forever after in the work we leave behind. We are born with an aesthetic purpose. And because of the inspiration of what created us, we cannot be a rapid consumption society. In order to blossom, we must race against the clock. We must work in the mind and of the spirit. And we must not allow our causes or our prejudices or politics to foil us and color what we create or what we wish we had created. My human being friend, know this: the work, the art, the bit of literature, the piece of a poem exists as is. It exists as is with its own rules and permutations that we may or may not understand in a single lifetime. Great literature inspires us. Lesser texts, lesser aesthetics do not. And therefore it is our duty to find what makes us and what forces us to think and live on a plane of a higher aesthetic that would not exist if not for the great work of art, the amazing bit of literature that lifts us upward, closer to the sun, nearer the heavens, where inspiration lives to breathe closer to us, by heightening our assets and our presumptions and our prejudices. And in the end, we realize Harold Bloom's internal inferno of a dismissed question, that he refused to abide, but he accepted in others as an echo of what must never be, is that, what is it for? Does have one external answer that unbeautifully answers its own prosaic question. What is it for? What is it for? It is for because we are here. And that, my human meme friend, is the leaping off point for the advancement of divinity in the beauty of a shared human aesthetic. We are here, and we love, and we think, and we do not need an external influence to destroy what enlivens us. And yes, we can love beauty in the literature, while rejecting the human inadequacies of those who choose to perpetuate that reason behind an aesthetic that can only be consumed and perhaps appreciated, but never fully understood. Thank you for listening. Be a human meme.